My name is Daniel, and I was married to Marie. We were both 50 years old. We had been married for nearly 20 years. When people see us together, they see what I believed was a stable and secure marriage. We have two children, 19, female, and 16, female, a nice house, good jobs, all the things expected of a successful relationship. But under the surface, where no one really sees, things had started to crack. I work a lot. Way too much, if you ask Marie. I'm a project manager at a big firm, and long days are part of the job. In the beginning, she often complained about how rarely I was home, but it got quieter after a while, as if she stopped caring. I thought maybe it was good, that we had just found a way to live with it, but I was mistaken. Marie worked part-time at an industrial company as a receptionist. She had the main responsibility for our home and our children, but we had cleaning help and plenty of money to live our lives comfortably and with quite a high standard. When we discussed our situation before we had kids, we agreed that I would take on more work and more responsibility so that Marie could stay home part-time. But as the years went by, a feeling of distance began to grow between us. It was as if we lived in the same house but existed in completely different worlds. I could see in Marie that she was not happy, but when I tried to talk to her about it, she said everything was okay, that she was just a little tired. But it was as if an invisible wall had been erected between us. I started paying more attention to the little things. She smiled less, and her eyes, which used to radiate energy, now often seemed empty and heavy. Our conversations became mechanical, the intimate moments fewer, and socially it also got worse. We attended fewer dinners with friends, hosted fewer gatherings at home, and so on. I tried several times to talk to her, but never got any sensible answers. I began to feel helpless. There was no handbook for how to save your marriage when both parties seemed to be drifting apart for no apparent reason. I didn't really know what to do. I tried
If you liked
suggesting
this
couples
story,
therapy,
please subscribe
but
and give
Marie
us a
quickly
thumbs up.
dismissed it.
It helps
She
a
said
lot,
we didn't have
and
any
you won't
major
miss out on
problems
any
and
future
that everything
stories.
would be fine with time.
Take care and live your
But I
best
couldn't
life.
shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Then one day, a Wednesday, I came home earlier than usual. I was going to drop off some things in the garage, so I stopped in the driveway and went into the garage. After putting everything away, I took the way through the garage. When I stepped into the hallway between the living room and kitchen, I heard her on the phone. I don't know exactly who she was talking to, but it was obviously not my parents or hers. She told the person, "Oh yes, I met him this week, both on Monday and yesterday. It was exactly what I needed. I'm really sore now." She listened to what the person on the other end said and then responded, "No, I haven't. Our marriage is not a real marriage anymore. We're like two friends in the same house, one of whom is away 90% of the time." I snuck away from there. I was in shock and didn't know what to do. I went back into the garage and just sat on a stool there staring at the wall, with a feeling in my body that I can't describe, completely numb, and then it turned into anger. I had major problems figuring out how to handle it. I sat in the garage for over an hour and then went into the house, the usual way, through the front door. Marie greeted me as usual with a hi. I usually go up to her and kiss her cheek when I come home. This time I didn't. I just said hi. I was too afraid I would say something stupid. So I slipped into our bedroom and packed a bag for the gym and then slipped out again. That day, I went all out at the gym. I completely exhausted myself, and before I showered, I found a punching bag. I gave it everything I had. It ended with my hands, knuckles, and arms being completely bruised. I took my time in the shower, and then I went home. My 16-year-old daughter wondered where I had been since I missed dinner. I looked at the clock in surprise. It was past 7. It had taken much longer than I thought. I answered that I had met a friend without being specific. She seemed satisfied with that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, rage mixed with sadness and a desire for revenge. But I came to a few conclusions. 1. I would find out what she was up to and with whom. 2. I would prepare for divorce. I couldn't live with someone who behaved like this. There was no trust left. But of course, I pondered the question that everyone in the same situation as I ponders: why? Could it be my job and working hours? But I didn't think so. Not then. I had asked her several times at regular intervals. I saw that things weren't good, But I tried to talk to her about it, and she didn't agree or avoided the discussion. I assumed I would find out eventually. I still had so many unanswered questions. Was it someone I knew? Had they met in our house, our home? When did this start? I turned over all possible scenarios in my head, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. But it's an impossible puzzle to solve. Lots of some pieces were missing. But I needed concrete information, something to go on. So I decided to start by trying to find out who, how long, and how deep this was. Also, who it was she was talking to on the phone. I started right away the next morning. When I got to work, I spent some time logging in with the phone company and downloading our phone specifications. There was a call that had started just before I got home yesterday. It had lasted about 20 minutes and was to Johanna, Marie's best friend. So she knew what Marie was up to. Well, I kept that in mind. The rest of the day passed so quickly that I barely had time to play detective. But I did manage to start looking up microphones that could be installed at home and would be very hard to detect. They were all wireless and had a microphone part and then a transmitter part, connected by a wire. They were activated by sound and then they recorded and sent it to a central unit. Completely wireless, it was perfect, but they weren't cheap, around $200 each. I took 5. When the workday was over, I really didn't want to go home. So I went to a store, bought workout clothes, and went to the gym. I stayed there for almost 3 hours, worked out for an hour, and then spent 2 hours in the shower, pool, and sauna. It was 7 in the evening when I got home. No reaction from my 16-year-old this time, and none from Marie, which I was actually glad about. I really didn't want to talk to her just now. I decided to talk to my best friend, Liam, and asked him if he could meet me at our favorite bar right away. An hour later, just after 8 in the evening, we toasted with our beers. "So, what did you want to talk about?" he asked. I said that I didn't want to talk about it, whereupon he muttered, "What a woman you are, Daniel," and grinned broadly. "Spit it out now." I started from the beginning and told him exactly what had happened so far. He shook his head. "I can't believe it," he said, then held up his hands in a gesture like, "Calm down, I believe you, but I don't believe it." He asked what the plan was, and I told him that I had to get more info and see who it is and how long it has been going on. His first question was, why? He meant that the only thing that will happen is that you'll feel worse, and you won't get any closer to a solution. I knew he was right, but I still needed to know to get closure. He seemed to accept this. My next question was what I'd do with Johanna. Then he looked puzzled. I said that if she helped my wife keep this secret, one might wonder about her morals. Maybe I should, her husband, find out? He wasn't sure if it was my place to tell him and advised me to wait and see if more things came up. He did his best to cheer me up, but it didn't go so well, one might say. Around 0:30 at night, we broke up and went home. My mood worsened as soon as I got home and I couldn't handle questions about where I had been, so I lay down on the couch and fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to people moving around the house, so I dragged myself up, still tired after only about 4 hours of sleep. Marie asked where I had been and I answered, bar hopping with a friend, which was entirely true. She didn't seem to like that answer. But I showered, packed my gym bag, and left the house. The day crawled by, and work was not easy with so little sleep. But I got at least one pleasant surprise. The things I had ordered had arrived. Now it was just a matter of installing them. After coming home from the gym at 7 as usual, I spent most of the time in my office. I read up on how the microphones worked. After midnight, it was time to act. Everyone was asleep. With the microphones in hand, I sneaked around the house. I chose strategic places, one in the living room where Marie often spent her time, one in our bedroom, and one in the kitchen. I placed 2 microphones in the garage and the hall, as I suspected these areas would be central for conversation and possible meetings. The installations went smoothly, and I double-checked that all devices were working as they should. When everything was in place, I went back to my office. I connected the microphones to the recording device and hid it in my study. They worked perfectly. The sound is crystal clear. I could hear myself walking around the house. And I went to bed next to Marie, and for the first time in many months, she turned around and lay behind my back, hugging me from behind. I didn't move a muscle. I pretended to sleep because I felt extremely uncomfortable. All I could think about was what she was doing when I wasn't looking. It made me disgusted, and I couldn't stand her touch. I had to brace myself not to push her away. Eventually, sleep took me, and I woke up as Marie left the bed. I showered, dressed, and packed my bag. Then I went downstairs. "Good morning," I got when I came down. "Good morning," I replied and tried to smile at her, but I felt like the Joker in Batman with a fake smile that was just plastered on. I didn't want to stay here. I just wanted out. Over the past few days, I haven't eaten a single meal at home. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I always ate out, and today will be no different. "See you later tonight," I said and hurried out the door before she could say anything else. I couldn't access the microphones from work, so I had to wait until tonight to listen. My stomach knotted as I thought about what I would hear. I took some time to look at the phone lists again, but saw nothing strange. When the workday finally ended, I went straight home. I wanted to listen to the recordings. The gym had to wait. I tried to act as normally as possible when I walked in the door. "Hi, how was your day?" Marie asked as if everything was normal. I replied briefly and hurried up to my office. When the door was closed behind me, I pulled out the recording device and started listening. The first thing I heard was my own voice from the morning when I left the house. After a few minutes, I heard Marie talking on the phone. "Yes, he's gone now," she began. God, I thought, here we go. I think he's cheating. At first, I didn't understand. How could she think that? But of course, the way I've been behaving, coming home late, keeping to myself, and not saying much. Of course, that's why I started suspecting her of the same thing. I actually felt a certain satisfaction about it. I'm not proud of, well, maybe a little, but I didn't want to be proud of it. It felt good to know she actually had some feelings left. He comes and goes at odd times, working out at the gym or going on bar rounds with friends. The quotation marks were clearly audible in her pronouncement. She didn't believe my explanations at all, which were actually completely true. She was silent for a while, and then she said, "I don't care. Couldn't he just say that? Not just go looking for something else?" It seemed like the person on the other end was pointing out her hypocrisy, but she didn't want to hear it at all. Apparently, infidelity was okay as long as it was her doing it. My rage began to grow, and I wondered if this was a bad idea. Maybe I should listen to this when neither of them was around. The problem is that such occasions are so rare. Marie continued talking on the phone, and I tried to discern every word. I heard her mention something about a meeting the day before, where and when. But what really struck me was when she said, "I feel like I'm alive again when I meet him." I felt betrayed when she said that, anger mixed with jealousy and sorrow. After listening to the recording, I felt both helpless and angry. If I had any illusion left about saving my marriage, it was surely completely gone now. I left the office around noon. Marie was already sleeping heavily. I sneaked over to her phone and pressed the screen. A message had arrived from a person named Stephen. It said, "Call you tomorrow." I didn't know any Stephen. Is it her mysterious man? I stared at her phone for several minutes, feeling almost like an intruder even though it was our shared belonging. I couldn't see his phone number, but at least now I had something to go on. The next day, I took a little more time at work to research the phone numbers my wife had called. And there it was, a Stephen. It was a man on our street. 3 houses down our street he lived. And he was not single. As far as I knew, his wife was also a housewife. This means that they must meet at my place or in a hotel. My stomach turned and I couldn't eat all day. I really should have waited until after lunch to do this research, but I didn't think my reaction would be like this. That evening, I went to the gym, and instead of going home at my usual time, around 7, I called Liam and asked if he felt like having a beer. Sure, he did, and we met at the bar again. This time, I chose a secluded table so we could be alone. He could see that I wasn't feeling well. "Spit it out, buddy," was the first thing he said when we sat down with our beers. I told him about Stephen. He shook his head at me. He had advised against digging into it, and I hadn't listened. But when I told him that I thought they were actually doing it at my place, then he became silent. "Now that you know, what is your plan? Are you going to confront her? Talk to Stephen? Or maybe his wife?" I shook my head and took a sip of my beer. "I don't know. I don't want to talk to his wife yet until I can show her something other than phone calls." He admitted that it seemed reasonable, but he asked me what I was going to do about them being at our house. I didn't know what to answer. I don't want to sleep in the bed when I think about it. He understood me. He had felt the exact same way. I didn't tell him about my microphones because I didn't like that I had installed them, but I couldn't stand the uncertainty. We talked until about 10:30 p.m. and then I went home, still not sure if I would be able to sleep in the bed. The house was quiet. Everyone was asleep. I started listening to all the recordings. The recordings spoke clearly. She had a long conversation with him, and they said they would meet at our house the next day. My stomach knotted up and I felt sick. The conversation was over an hour long. She told him what she thought about his moves in bed. It was graphic and I seriously started to feel really ill. In the end, I couldn't take it anymore and had to run to the bathroom and vomit. In the midst of it all, my 16-year-old daughter came and knocked on the door to ask how I was doing. I blamed it on having eaten something strange. From that night, I refused to lie in bed with Marie. I lay down in the guest room and fell asleep after several hours filled with anxiety. The advantage now was that I knew what I had to do. Plan my divorce. There is no reason to drag it out. The longer it takes, the longer I will feel terrible. But I didn't want to confront her yet. I wanted it to be a surprise. I felt really bad, and the next day, much of my nausea turned into rage. I went to my boss first thing in the morning and requested a week's leave. I explained why. He said it should be fine since the project I was leading was not in a critical phase. As long as I was available by phone, it should be okay. The second thing I did was contact a lawyer. I found one who actually had time to see me right away. I was worried that he might not be very good if he could see me immediately. But that worry dissipated after the first meeting. He appeared extremely knowledgeable and professional. He needed detailed information about our assets, and in terms of fixed assets, the only thing we had in common was the house. The rest were cash, funds, and stocks. We had a good economy and had saved quite diligently over the years. I now knew I would lose half, but honestly, I didn't care about that at all. I asked if there were any legal obstacles to moving out immediately, but there wasn't such a problem, he said. So the next thing on my list was to try to find somewhere to live. I contacted several housing companies and found an apartment with 4 rooms and a kitchen. 1 bedroom, 1 living room, 1 study, and 1 bedroom for my daughter, if she wants to live with me. I signed the papers the same day. It went much faster than I had expected. It is also quite close to my job. I knew that Marie would get a visit during the day and I had no desire to just let it happen. But I suspected that I might have to let it happen for it to be captured on the recordings. So I stayed away from home. Instead, I called Liam and told him what had happened. His only question was, "Can I help you in any way?" And the fact is, he could. I had to move out and I would need help with that. It was no problem, he said. He and his wife Isabella could help me when the time came. It was a day full of things to fix, and when I got home at 7, Marie tried to talk to me, but I said that I didn't want to, that I was tired and just wanted to do some work and then sleep. She tried to say something more, but I just walked away. She called after me, but I just closed the door behind me. I really wanted to not talk to her, and when I thought about it, we hadn't had a single longer conversation in 3-4 days. The only thing I feel when I see her is anger, and I would probably just lose my temper and say something stupid. Besides, I knew what she had done today, and I really didn't want to listen to the recordings, because I suspect the nausea will return. But I forced myself to do it anyway. The content was exactly as bad as I feared. I could hear when she let him in, kissing sounds, then giggling and talking, and then the bedroom microphone picked up what they were doing. My wonderful wife who betrayed me in perhaps one of the worst ways possible. On the recording, she begged and asked him for it, and then the other sounds that always occur. I could only handle 10-15 seconds of it before I turned it off and went to the bathroom to vomit. Marie knocked on the door, but I screamed at her to leave me alone. I was furious and nauseous at the same time. When I came out of there, she came up to me and asked how I was feeling. "How am I feeling?" I snarled, my voice almost breaking with emotions. "I feel awful, Marie. I feel so terribly bad. Leave me alone," I snarled at her. She looked as if I had slapped her, but I couldn't stand her. I went into the guest room, slammed the door, and didn't come out anymore that evening. I did not listen on more recordings. I couldn't handle it. Now I was trying to focus on moving out as soon as possible. The only thing I did was take the evidence I had, put it on a USB stick, and gave it to my lawyer. It was now Friday, and I had to endure the entire weekend. My daughter was home, so I was pretty sure she wouldn't do anything at our place now. So I went to Liam and spent time with him and his wife. I didn't go home either on Friday or Saturday. I slept at Liam's place. I received several texts from Marie asking why I wasn't coming home. I just replied that I didn't want to be there. No explanation why. I couldn't handle the discussion right now. My daughter also texted, asking. She was worried, but I reassured her that I was fine and that we could talk more about it later. She wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer, but eventually accepted it. I didn't want to worry her, but I couldn't give her the whole truth yet. When I arrived home on Sunday, I was confronted by Marie. "We need to talk," was the first thing she said to me. My response was just no, and then I went into the guest room, locked the door, and lay down staring at the ceiling. She pounded on the door several times, demanding that I open it. I just stayed silent. Now that I wasn't near friends, the sounds she made from the recording were played for me, over and over again. They made me cry. So I spent Sunday evening from about 9 until I fell asleep at 2, 3 in the morning, crying and being furious. On Monday, I pretended to go to work at the usual time, but instead, I went to pick up my key to my new apartment. I walked in, measured, and planned what I would need to buy. Then I started shopping for things that I knew I would need. Plates, cutlery, bed linen. I didn't want anything we had at home. Toiletries, and other things I didn't want to bring from home. The day went by quickly, and soon it was time to go home. But around 5 o'clock, my lawyer called. He had the papers ready. Finally, I went to him and picked them up. Then I went home. Now I only had a few things left to do. I would use the evening to close credit cards, split money and accounts, and tomorrow when my daughter went to school, I would confront my wife and give her the papers. Marie tried to give me a hug when I got home, but I backed away from her. I really didn't want her to touch me. "What is wrong with you?" she shouted angrily after me. As soon as I was alone, I started by closing credit cards and paying them off. I divided all the cash between our accounts and transferred 50% to her. Then I sent an email to a real estate agent and asked for a valuation of our house. Marie came into my office and sat down on the sofa. "We need to discuss what is happening with you," she said with an expression that made it clear she wasn't going to take no for an answer. I wondered if this was the right moment, but my daughter was actually not home yet. She was at a friend's place. I said nothing, inserted a USB stick with the very revealing recordings, and then played the part taken from our bedroom the week before. Her voice filled my office, and she turned white pale. I played it for maybe 10, 15 seconds and then turned it off. "You and I have nothing more to say to each other," was all I said to her. I took off my wedding ring and placed it on my desk in front of her and handed her the divorce papers. "Let your lawyer read them and then sign them. I'll be moving out tomorrow, and then you can consider yourself single and don't need to sneak around with anything." She was in shock and couldn't say a word. It wasn't until I had left the room and started walking up the stairs that I heard her scream and call after me. "Wait, it's not what it sounds like," she screamed. Something that everyone who gets caught says. The ridiculousness of that statement made me burst out laughing. For the first time in several days, now I had shown my hand and it felt wonderful. I hurried into my room and locked the door. Outside, I could hear her banging and trying to get in. She started talking to me through the door. First, there were excuses that it wasn't really as bad as the recording implied, and after about an hour, she admitted to the circumstances. And then she started blaming me, my job, the lack of intimacy, spark, and that she felt unnoticed. She didn't confirm it was Stephen, but I already knew. I planned to tell his wife. She deserves to know. I had also planned to talk to Johanna's husband. If I could find something on her, I wish I could. Even though I didn't respond to anything she said, she continued. I really didn't want to talk to her. I had my closure now. She stopped talking to me through the door and started texting and calling instead. My phone was buzzing for hours, then it stopped. I slept like a log, and in the morning, I skipped the shower and snuck out and disappeared. I managed to pack some clothes. As soon as I left, the calling and texting started again. She must have heard my car. I had gotten a good night's sleep for the first time in several days and felt a little better. Don't get me wrong, I still felt like crap, but it was more like ripping off a Band-Aid, or when you as a child get your foot stuck on a nail. As long as it stays, the pain is unbearable. But as soon as it is pulled out and the blood starts to flow, it immediately feels better and the worst pain disappears, replaced by something you can endure, even if you feel awful. I hadn't read any texts at all since she started bombing me. I didn't know if I wanted to. Just more excuses. I went and bought a couple of sandwiches that I ate in the car on the way to my new apartment. Once there, I used the shower. I opened my phone and started reading. I hadn't planned to, but maybe it's for the best. At best, I'll get a little more information. At worst, I'll have to turn it off if I feel too sick. But I didn't find out much new, just that she was sorry and that she shouldn't have done it and that it was mostly my fault. Because there were lots of things I should have done that I didn't do. When these confessions didn't lead to me responding, the messages she sent began to change in character, from being explanatory, reasonable, and apologetic to becoming hostile. In one message, she called me a beta male, coward, and a zero who will lose his entire family over this. I stopped reading. And instead, I called my two daughters and explained the situation. They refused to believe me at first, but I said I had recordings and confessions from their mom over text messages. They were very upset over her behavior. They were going to come over in the evening to check out my new apartment and talk. I was also on the phone with the lawyer and Liam. The lawyer explained the procedure and said she had 30 days to respond. But because we have minor children, there is a waiting period of 6 months. It will take time, but that doesn't matter to me. I'm just glad to be out of the house. Liam said he would bring his wife and help me pick up some things. I would prefer to go there and get things when she wasn't there, but the likelihood of her now leaving the house was quite small. I decided to call Stephen's wife instead. That call was not fun. She initially refused to believe me, but I said we could meet and I could play the material I have and show her the texts that my Marie had sent. We met at a cafe far from our neighborhood. We went through everything there. Her emotional reaction varied greatly. You could say she experienced the whole spectrum of emotions during the half hour we sat there and talked. However, when she left me, she was furious. I expected it wouldn't be long before I heard from Marie. Sure enough, about an hour later, I was bombarded with furious texts about what a jerk I was for ruining his relationship. I ignored her texts and instead focused on preparing my new home for my daughter's arrival. I went out and bought a new bed and a small table for the kitchen, as well as some chairs. I wanted them to feel comfortable and welcome, despite the tumultuous situation. At 7 in the evening, I heard a knock on the door. I opened it and was greeted by my two daughters. They looked both worried and confused, but I tried to show them that I was okay after everything that had happened. It was a long and emotional meeting for all of us, but there was never any question that they wouldn't take my side. They understood why I had moved out. My youngest, who didn't have her own apartment, was worried about where she would live. But I said she was probably old enough to decide for herself. She said she wanted to live with me, which was nice to hear. Marie had tried calling me several times during the evening, but I chose to ignore the calls. My daughters and I spent time together, ate pizza, and talked about the future. We tried to keep the conversation as positive as possible, even though it was difficult. I explained to them that the most important thing for me was that we stick together, no matter where we lived. We discussed their schooling, activities, and how we would celebrate birthdays and holidays in the future. I assured them that their lives would continue as normally as possible, despite the big change. Their support made me feel a bit stronger, and we talked about how we could adapt to the new reality. When they went home, I felt both mentally and emotionally exhausted. I fell asleep in my new bed, and for the first time, it felt like this could actually work out. The next day was no bed of roses. I took Liam and Isabella with me to avoid the worst confrontations from my Marie. When we got there, she came flying out into the yard, energetically gesticulating. She calmed down somewhat when she saw I wasn't alone, but she still tried to hug me, and I backed away. That made her even angrier, but there was nothing she could do. She alternated between calling me every nasty name under the sun, Even some she made up herself and pleading that we could work it out. She tried to start a conversation about what had happened, but I refused to talk about it. I just kept repeating that I was there to pick up the things I needed. Eventually, Isabella calmed her down and took her into the house. They sat in the living room and talked while Liam and I gathered my things. It took several hours to get everything I needed, but eventually we were done. After further attempts and a lot of crying on her part, we were able to leave. Thank God I got out of there. Being there packing was utterly unbearable. The only thing I could think about when I was in this house was what had been going on behind my back. On the way, the broker called. He promised he would come out the next day and asked me to be there. I looked forward to getting a valuation on the house and being able to close that chapter in my life. But I also knew there was a lot to deal with before I could feel any form of peace. Marie continued to bombard me with texts and calls, but I strictly adhered to the recommendations from my lawyer. Answer only necessary questions regarding the children. However, my mood also fluctuated extremely because of this. For if I am to follow his advice, I must read her messages, and it was not always easy to keep my temper in check. Some things she wrote made me furious, and some things just sad, like blaming everything on me and my job, saying I was never available for her. She did not mention the times I tried to get her to talk about why she didn't seem to be doing well, when I suggested therapy. No, everything was my fault. It made me furious to read that. Or when she informed me that tonight she was going out to be with Stephen again, because she is single now and so is he, because of me. She also gave a detailed description of what she would let him do to her, and that he was much better than me and my little baby Carrot. It took a great deal of self-control not to throw the phone against the wall. That evening after the move, I got the first call from her friends. Johanna was the first to call. I answered because I didn't recognize the number. She thought I should go back home and sort it out. I asked her directly how long she had known that Marie had someone on the side. There was silence on the line for a while. I asked again. She then said that I should behave like a man and go home and talk to her. I informed her that a real man doesn't take this kind of crap from his wife. He dumps her like the trash she is and never looks at her again. That's what a real man does. What a real woman does is she talks to her husband if she's unhappy. She doesn't spread her legs for someone else the moment there's a problem. And I added, a real friend would have told Marie that what she was doing was a gigantic mistake and that she should have talked to me instead. She was dissatisfied with my tone, she said. Okay, maybe she used some nastier words, but you get what I mean. I repeated my question on how long she had known what Marie was up to. Now she was angry at me, and it slipped out that it was she who suggested to Marie, said she would get something fun on the side. After that, she hung up on me. After our conversation ended, it took no more than 20 minutes before her dad called. It was a difficult call. They had always treated me like a member of the family, and I really felt sorry for him. We had a long conversation, and he said that no matter what I chose to do, they understood. He said he would probably have done exactly the same thing. The long conversation with Marie's dad made me realize that it wasn't just my children, myself, or Stephen's wife who were affected. My extended family would also take a hit. After we hung up, I felt that I had his support. The fact that he would have done the same thing in my situation made me feel that my path forward had indeed been the right one. I tried to sleep. I put on Netflix. I didn't want it to be quiet in the room where I was lying. I concentrated on the background noise and eventually fell asleep. The next day, the realtor came to appraise the house. I took Liam with me for safety. Marie and I tried to remain polite and professional in front of him, despite the tense silence between us. He went through all the rooms, took notes and pictures. The whole procedure took a few hours, and afterward, he promised to get back with a detailed report in a few days. To avoid getting stuck in any conversation with Marie, I had deliberately positioned myself on the road, behind the realtor's car. That way, I could walk with him to his car and use that poor guy as some sort of shield against Marie, then quickly slip into my car and take off before she could pull me into any discussion. We didn't get more than a mile before texts from her started coming in again. The same old nagging that it was all my fault, even though she admitted, she wrote, that she also did wrong. So now we were apparently even, and I should just come home and sort it out so we could continue our lives. and that this nonsense had to stop, and it wasn't a big deal if she had a bit of fun on the side, because it didn't mean anything. Liam was driving and he could see the smoke practically coming out of my ears as I sat reading on the phone. "Calm down, buddy," he tried to say, but I was shaking. I was so angry. I wrote back, "Let Johanna find a new guy for you, because I will never have anything to do with you again." Her text then took on a more aggressive tone with swear words and colorful new names for my character and certain body parts. I also received new information about what Stephen had done with her in our house just before I came to meet the realtor. Only a few days ago, my stomach would have turned sick of having that sent to me, but now I hardly felt anything at all. I had become numb and indifferent. Liam asked what I was going to do now. I said I really wanted to take down Johanna. Liam pointed out that I have nothing on her. And that was true, but I had several days of recordings in the house that I hadn't listened to yet. Maybe there was something there? The problem with that is that I have to listen to that misery again. But maybe it would be worth it? When I got home, I started going through it, quickly, and eventually I found what I needed. It was a conversation between Johanna and Marie the day after I moved out. Marie had put it on speaker. It sounded like she was doing something in the kitchen at the same time. Marie asks, "How's it going with Stefan? Do you see him at all?" And Johanna admits, "Oh yes, I see him every week. And now Andreas is going to a conference for 4 days. So he'll be sleeping here with me. Then I don't have to worry about him walking in on us when we're busy." She laughed when she said the last part, as if it were something funny. So they had been carrying on at their place. Just as gross as with Marie then. Well, I would talk to Andreas about this. It'll have to be tomorrow, so I can get this over with. The flood of text messages had reduced after the outburst when we went home earlier in the day. Both my girls called and asked how I was. I tried to keep my spirits up and told them that everything was okay. My oldest said their mom had called and cried on the phone. Apparently, I had behaved like a pig towards her when the realtor was there. I explained what had happened. Not in detail, but enough for her to understand the context and what she had written in the text message after the meeting. She understood why I had lost my temper. We talked for over 2 hours, and it felt very good that they understood. I tried to steer the conversation towards more fun things, and she mentioned that she had actually met a guy. They had been dating for 4 weeks now. I was happy for her, but I thought it was quite ironic that her relationship was beginning when mine was falling apart. I told her that I would like to meet him. As soon as I have a furnished apartment, I will invite them over. She was eager to show him off. Apparently, he was also studying to be an engineer in the same field as me, civil engineering in energy and environment. I promised to get things in order at home so they could come and visit. I had almost all the furniture now. What I was missing was a sofa for the living room, a coffee table, a TV stand, and a bed for the youngest girl. Then, of course, I needed paintings, curtains, and other things that make it a real home. I am bad such that I plan to give my daughters the task to help me with it. That evening, I slept quite well. I marveled at how much children mean to one's well-being. All it took was a call from them to put me in a better mood. Fascinating. When I woke up the next morning, I had a feeling of determination. I had a plan, and I had to get my life in order. Despite all the chaos that had occurred, there was a fresh start ahead of me, and that insight gave me energy. I decided to tackle the last part of my to-do list that same morning. It was the day I would contact Johanna's husband, Andreas. It was not something I was looking forward to, but I knew he deserved to know what was happening behind his back. After some detective work, I got his phone number. I called him. We had only met a few times, but he recognized my voice and sounded a bit reserved at first. Maybe Johanna and Marie had talked a lot of trash. I asked him if he had time to meet me over lunch, as there was something I needed to talk to him about. He asked if we could handle it over the phone, but I said it was important that we met for this. He didn't sound very pleased, but he agreed to meet. I said we could meet outside his job and then go somewhere to sit down. Around noon, we met and went to a cafe not far from his job. He looked a bit impatient, and I suddenly didn't know exactly how to start. But I said, "You have surely heard about what happened between me and Marie." He nodded, and I continued. When I realized something was wrong, I installed some microphones in our house. That's how I got evidence of what she had been up to. On these recordings, I also discovered that Johanna knew what was going on, and she admitted yesterday to me that it was she who had suggested to Marie to go out and try a little. I could see that he tensed up and was uncomfortable with my claims, because anyone can claim anything about someone. So I tried to get to the point faster. When it dawned on me that Johanna had been involved, I started listening through the recordings that were made after I moved out. Now he looked really uncomfortable and nervous. The day after I moved out and all the drama started, Marie and Johanna had a conversation on speakerphone. In that conversation, Johanna mentions that she also sees someone on the side named Stefan. Now Andreas is visibly shocked. He shakes his head but is more or less ashen-faced. "Do you know who that is?" I ask, and he nods. "It's her personal trainer." There is silence for a moment. "I'm sorry that I am bringing such bad news, but I thought you should know. I would have given a lot to find out what Marie was doing behind my back." I take out the USB stick and slide it across the table to him. "Listen to it and you'll know that what I say is true, and then you have something to confront her with." He nods but stares at the stick as if it were a rattlesnake. For obvious reasons, the conversation didn't last much longer than that. After something like this, it's hard to discuss anything else. He is where I was a week ago. I offered him to call if he wanted to talk, and then I left. I went straight to a furniture store to buy the last pieces of furniture I needed. It took the rest of the day, but afterward I was really satisfied. In the evening, I talked with my youngest about her room being ready. She packed a bag and some boxes with the essentials, and then I came over and picked her up. This time I didn't have Liam as a shield, but it went pretty well. Marie didn't come out at all. Apparently, my youngest had told her mother that she wanted to live with me. This had resulted in lots of tears from Marie. When that didn't help, she tried to badmouth or guilt trip her. But it didn't work. I was so happy to have someone in the apartment. Now there was always life and movement there. The following days went by quickly. I returned to work and we got a new everyday life, my youngest and I. We talked in the evenings, played games, and watched TV. Sometimes she had friends over. I thrived in my new reality. The divorce had to be negotiated. It took a few months before Marie had time. It was obvious that she was just trying to draw it out. But eventually we sat there opposite each other, on either long side of a gigantic table. I am sure those tables at lawyers' offices are that wide so people can't reach across and strangle their counterpart. She looked miserable. She had lost weight, gotten wrinkles, and was completely unmade up. Her hair didn't seem to be washed or brushed properly. I had found out from the daughters that she wasn't taking this well, despite all her talk about it being my fault and still having fun with Stephen, who, by the way, I was informed, had been kicked out by his wife the same day she received my recording and text message copies. He was now in the process of divorce too. As we sat there, opposite each other, the feelings were mixed. Partly relief that the process was progressing, partly a sorrow over what all this had led to. Marie avoided eye contact and her lawyer did most of the talking. My primary goal was to ensure that our daughters were affected as little as possible, which included their future housing and financial conditions. But it was impossible to completely overlook the bitterness and betrayal that still burned within me. Marie's lawyer presented their demands. She wanted the house, which I had almost expected. She couldn't get alimony, as there is no such thing in Sweden. Everyone takes responsibility for their own support. So I wasn't worried about that. The personal property was valued at roughly $100,000. The house was worth about $1.2 million. My lawyer pointed out the unreasonableness of such an exchange, and that our stance was to follow the law to the letter, 50-50, straight down the middle. I didn't want to stay in the house, so either she had to buy me out or we would sell it. I knew that Marie didn't have a chance to pay such a large sum, so I was practically forcing a sale. After a few hours of haggling, we took a break. I was both mentally and physically exhausted. I went out and had a cup of coffee, necessary to keep my head clear. Apparently, Marie had done the same. She came up to me at the coffee machine. It didn't look like she had slept well in the past weeks. "You look good," was her opening line. I guess that's relative compared to something else. Compared to her, I was a marvel of health. I didn't respond to that. It wasn't a question. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked, and I answered with a simple, "Yes, absolutely." "Don't you think we can solve this through therapy?" She looked down at the floor. No, I have no feelings left for you. When I found out what you were doing, I felt so sick I vomited. I was certain you would never do such a thing. When I confronted you about it, you started by blaming everything on me. And when that didn't work, you began calling me all sorts of names and then started sending descriptions of what you and Stephen had done together, right in the middle of everything. That kind of behavior clearly shows that you did not respect me or our relationship. When did you start despising me like this? Marie stood completely still, and tears ran uncontrollably down her face. As soon as I finished speaking, she turned and half ran into the ladies' room. When the break was over, the negotiation continued. Marie didn't return until 20 minutes after we had started. Thankfully, it only took another hour before we reached an agreement. It was decided that the house would be sold and that the youngest daughter could choose whom she wanted to live with. We share custody according to the law, but she would live with me for the time being. I have the legal right to receive child support, but I waived it. I don't want anything that reminds me of Marie, not even if it's money. The house was posted a month later and sold for a little more than the valuation. It became a nice sum of money for me to save until I find something worth buying. Marie and I did not meet after the meeting with the lawyer. She also doesn't send any emails or texts. I found out from my children that she is single and that she hasn't seen Stephen after he was thrown out by his wife. All that talk about what she was doing afterwards was apparently just nonsense to hurt me as much as possible. She now lives in a small one-room apartment and works full-time at a grocery store. She have to do her own cleaning now, since she cannot afford to hire someone. Andreas called me a week after I gave him the recording. He told me that he had requested a divorce from Johanna and that Johanna completely lost it on Marie because she believed it was her fault that he found out. In their case, they had a prenuptial agreement and the house was his. So she had to move in with her parents when he simply changed the locks the same day he confronted her. As for me, it's now been about 6 months since the divorce was finalized and I'm feeling great. I work just as much now but plan to slow down if I meet a nice woman. Therapy has helped me figure out what happened and why she did what she did. Forsaking the relationship is risky, and it's important to always make time for each other. It's an expensive lesson learned. I will take with me into the next relationship. I have gone on a few dates, but nothing has clicked directly. But I am not in a hurry. I do not feel lonely. There is plenty of life in my apartment thanks to my youngest daughter. And by the way, I got to meet my oldest daughter's boyfriend. They match perfectly together. It is interesting to see two people who complement each other so well. It will be fun to see them develop together. She is head over heels in love. It is quite cute.
If you liked this story, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot, and you won't miss out on any future stories. Take care and live your best life.